Good evening, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We are going to take a minute as we let everybody into the Zoom room. We have a good little group already, and we're going to wait until people are all in. There's a tiny little poll. It is literally two questions. Are you a parent, a student, an educator? And if so, if you have kids, what grade are they in? Or if you are a student, what grade are you in? All right, we're starting to make our way into the room. Looks like we're hitting a kind of an early plateau. You know what? I think it may be time to jump in. We're going to have plenty of time for question and answer at the end. We always do with these. We're also we are recording this, and we're going to send you a copy of this. You can share, you can watch it again, go through the slides. But we're glad you're here, and hopefully we can answer a lot of questions. Things are definitely in flux with testing, as they often are. A new world with digital testing and new things coming as soon as April with the ACT. So why don't we go ahead and jump in and start on this webinar. Here we go. Oh, and our two people we're talking. We got our main man, Matt Kiesner. Matt. And Matt has been with Applerouth for a long, long time, helping develop our curriculum, helping write our tests, analyze our tests. This man knows the SAT and ACT better than most humans on the planet. So very grateful to have Matt. And I'm the founder of Applerouth and still talking about the stuff 24 years in. So it's good stuff. Glad you're here. And let us go ahead and jump into the content. The broad strokes, what's happening with the world of testing. The ACT is currently pretty flat, pretty laggy after the pandemic. They were once at the peak of testing back in 2016, but the SAT redesigned itself, and it's been a very popular redesign. And then post-pandemic, they went digital, and so far they are doing great. There is a lot of excitement around the shorter digital SAT, more time per question, less speedy. And so the ACT is responding to this graph. They're making some changes, and they're going to see if they can regain some of the share they've lost over the past several years. All right. The SAT, it's growing. Why it's growing? People seem to like the short format, more time per question, the embedded calculator. The administrators like that it's simple. There's no paper to hand out or collect or scan. It's very simple. There are still some problems. If you're on the California side, testing is still a problem for access in California, Oregon a little bit. There are fewer schools opening for national test dates, which creates a problem. Some of our students in California are traveling 3 hours, 4 hours to find a test center, which is crazy. That's a problem. We also know that we had a few issues early on when the SAT came out, and Blue Book tests 1, 2, and 3, the practice are actually a little bit too easy, especially the more advanced math modules. Blue Book tests 4 through 6 are better calibrated, more accurate. We'll talk more about that in like half an hour or so. But that's kind of the very high level what's going on there. We also know in terms of levels of difficulty, like here I mentioned the math test is kind of a basic level of when you take the digital SAT, everyone gets a similar baseline module where you're getting a smattering of easy, medium, and hard questions. The introductory baseline is mostly mid-level, level 2, level 3 questions. If you get under 2/3 right, roughly, you go to an easier module on the SAT, which skews toward the easy questions. We're stacking the deck with question levels 1 and 2, mostly easy, and only a small percentage of 3 and 4 questions. If, however, you advance on that baseline section, you get 2/3 right or more, you get popped up to a more advanced module, which has skews toward the hard section. Now that's how the SAT is digital adaptive, whereas the ACT is not adaptive. That's one key difference. We also know that when it comes to the true calibration, it looks like the tests that we're seeing administered are more like this, where you have only a very small number of easy and medium, and you have a lot more of the mid-level and really hard questions. That's what we're seeing more frequently with testing. So that was one thing. We still know that testing feedback, if any of you have received a PSAT, the results look like this. They came back, from the October test. And SAT results also look like this. You're not getting the big question and answer. You're not getting question 4, 5, or 7. All you're getting are these heat maps. which are very, very much lacking in information about timing and pacing and did you get easy ones right or wrong? All that is kind of hidden in this results format. We also know that testing has been making quite the comeback. There was, some like the Florida system never even dropped testing. University of Florida, Florida State, University of the Georgia system brought it back within a year of the pandemic, and then we started having some of the high private schools that were very selective. Georgetown brought it back in 21. MIT, Tennessee schools brought it back. Purdue came back, but last spring we saw the popcorn, where it was Dartmouth and Yale and Brown, Texas, Harvard, Caltech, Cornell, Stanford, Hopkins, they all brought testing back and as testing with requirements. And we're expecting that there are going to be more requirements coming soon. I'm expecting again January, February, March after this current class is brought in. We're going to see more selectives come back in to the mix. We know that I wouldn't be surprised if schools like Princeton or UNC Chapel Hill or UVA or Chicago or UPenn or even Emory bring back testing requirements based on the percent of kids who are getting into these schools who have testing on their books. So Princeton, the students who actually enroll at these schools, who come to Princeton, over 85% of them have test scores. So I can see them easily making that shift. Same thing with UNC Chapel Hill. The vast majority of kids who get an offer and come to Chapel Hill have testing. So I can see how much they value testing. I can see them easily going back to test required, and Chicago as well. And then we have some information here that there seems to be a real advantage at certain schools for kids who had test scores. We're talking like at Yale, without tests, kids getting in at 2%, with tests, 6%. Boston College, it's more than double. Georgia Tech, before they were required, more than double. Colgate, Notre Dame is about double. Emory is about double. UVA, Wellesley, and so forth. So there are many, many schools where test scores really make a difference for admission. And that's one of the reasons why we're still talking about testing. Testing still is quite impactful in the world. So then I believe
I think
we are
that's
going to
me.
look brief. Matt, that's when
Yeah, I think that's. I think it's my name. The testing time thing moved again.
it is all yours, sir.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks, Jed. Yeah, so we're looking at some of the current ACT and SCT, and then we'll be talking about what the ACT will be, um, starting gradually this spring, and then moving into the new core ACT for all students in September. But the SCT will be the same here. So we have two reading and writing modules that is in that testing where the second module is based on how you do on the first module, and then two modules of math where the AC will continue with the structure of reading English. Well, I mean, I guess the order would be English, math, reading, and then science at the end. But if we go to, I think it's the next slide, we'll have what will be on there. So the difference is uh, the core ACT that's coming out the spring starting in April for computerized testing and then moving on to paper testing later is that science will become optional on there. And that so it'll be reading in English, math, and the English on the ACT and the writing on the SAT are both grammar. It's not essays. To be clear on that, and so that's a big change that we're seeing in this, and that the science is going away on there. Next one. So to understand the digital SAT tests, again, every student's gonna take the same module as a baseline. And then they're going to be given either easier one or harder one based on how they did. The test doesn't provide any feedback on that. They won't say, "Good job, you got to the tougher module," or it's like, "It's okay, keep going." So and even in the score report, you won't see. Now, obviously, if a student had a really high score, you could infer that they got to the harder module. But if they got a very low score, then you'd assume that they must have been in the easier module. And it's important to remember that these are section adaptive, so it's not an issue of individual questions. Once you're in a module, as you can move throughout, it's only at the end of that module. So the course is not adaptive. That is going to be a difference. Every student will be taking the same test on the core ACT, and they're not doing any of the sort of section adaptive or adaptive in terms of the question adaptive like some of the graduate school exams. It's just there's going to be it's going to be a shorter test, more on or more time per question, and then also that science becoming an optional, just like the essay is optional currently. So the uh, both tests seem to be pushing in this idea of like allowing more time per question, and so some of the and then we should say the current ACT, there's a lot more time per question than that, but um, as was happened over the decades of this is that it's an arms race and they're paying attention to each other, and certainly a lot of the feedback that the ACT has received that this test would be fine if I had more time, and so they're listening to that feedback, and realizing that doing things quickly does not necessarily need to be um, the reason, the best indicator of college success. And so we have on here that it is getting a lot closer in that, and that across the board uh, the ACT is definitely allowing more time per question, and they've listened to that feedback, and so that'll definitely be good for all students. The current ACT, the difficulty, especially on the reading and science section, is just having enough time and stamina to get through everything. Um, and so there's also the number of test items will be it will still be fewer on the digital SAT, and I think part of that is that because it is adaptive, they can have fewer items. But the ACD went down quite a bit in terms of what how many items they were testing on. As we can see in the slide. So they've definitely knocked off a few, but it is still more. Certainly more in terms of grammar, where there's these modules of on the digital SAT of like grammar, but there's maybe a dozen questions that are actually across both modules. It can vary per test form, where it's 40 questions on the ACT um, on there. So there's definitely some differences on there. All right, so we're talking about the digital SAT here for a little bit, and get into kind of some of the minutia of that. So there's the modules and uh, 32-minute modules, 27 questions each on the reading and writing. And there's no subdivide between reading, like the reading comprehension questions and the writing grammar questions. They kind of flow within. And then math, we also have 20 questions each, 35-minute modules on there. There will be unmarked pretest questions that will not affect the student scores. There is some like there seems to be an idea that there might be some similar pretest questions on the new ACT, though the amount or frequency has not yet been determined. So like, that's still like a question mark for what we know. So it is coming. Soon. Students can take it as early as April, if they are able to take it in a certain like on a computer-based testing platform. But we'll see that we don't know how much that's actually going to how many opportunities that there will be for many students in many locations. Um, so we got some of the structural changes here. So we have the English, definitely fewer questions. Knocked off 25 questions, knocked off 15 math questions. Only 4 questions less on reading, but more time. Like, so you reduced 4 questions and you've added 5 minutes. Like that's a pretty kind thing to do on there. And then the science section is also um, uh, not reducing the number of questions, but increasing increasing the amount of time. And less speedy. So there is more time for every per question, which I think a lot of students are gonna feel good about. Sure. And so we have this science is optional. This is a interesting policy because that I think is what one thing that's made the ACT unique for a long time. I think the why is that students don't like it, and I don't think that colleges really cared about it. The science has always been kind of a gimmicky section, in terms of like you don't have to know a lot of science, you just have to know a lot of strategy in order to beat it. Um, so will students still take it? I mean, it can be good for students that want to show their STEM skills and possibly go into a engineering school or something at a math focus. But we have not heard from any school saying that it is mandatory for all applicants, or saying conversely that, oh, you don't need to take it, we won't consider it. Like some schools, like UGA, does not consider the ACT essay. Like it has no bearing whether you do it or not. Um, the and yeah, so the external questions will be embedded within. That was one of the things I was talking about there. Um, so we have some numbers on that. And we have our some of the content changes, and I would say like there, this is still like, I think there's it needs to be an asterisk on any of this. Is like, because there's not a practice test that's been released yet as of this moment where we can see this test, right? So this is stuff that's been coming from the ACT, but they've been kind of trickling it out, and they have a a webinar coming, soon, and so we'll probably know more after that. But something we definitely know is that they're gonna vary the AC English passages. The current test is 15 questions and 5 passages. And we don't know exactly how it's going to be divided up, but there will be shorter passages. There will be some passages that will have 10 questions, the passages will have 5 questions. There's going to be one of them will be a new argumentative essay that will ask the questions about that. I don't. We were talking about this in the curriculum meeting, like literally today. I don't think it's necessarily going to be like 100% new question types, but I think it'll be testing transitions, testing certain kinds of like, is this effective writing but rather than just being any kind of passage, it'll be like a persuasive essay. And then something that's definitely happening is they're adding stems to every question. And what that means is that every question will ask you a question. It won't just be like the current one, it'll be no change and then 3 options. And it's implied that you pick the best option. Now it will say, and it looks like they're definitely going to be using kind of like stock answers, like which choice is grammatically correct. So they won't be asking you which one affects the pronoun. But then they're also definitely going to be doing things where which one is the least redundant, and asking about redundancy in there. And then for the math, they are definitely um, reducing the answer choices from 5 to 4. So the ACT will be 4 answer choices for all sections. Um, the they're saying that there'll be fewer questions on advanced topics, but we don't know if that those topics are going away. They're just like, a lower um, frequency of them. Of course, there will be fewer math questions regardless. So I can't say, oh, I wouldn't jump on there and say it's an easier math at this point. I think that is definitely premature. But they do want to get a fewer time-sensitive questions. They look like they'll be reducing the like needlessly convoluted word problems, which I think is a problem that the ACD currently has. There's a lot of kind of junk word problems, very little math ideas, but you just have to kind of slog through sentences about nothing to get the information you need. And then there's the fewer questions integrating essential skills category, which is honestly kind of a hazy category to begin with, but it's like the idea of like mixing multiple things, um, there are multiple math types in there, and that would have always been like a separate way of looking at things versus just questions on geometry or algebra or something like that. And so the reading was they're saying that the passage will vary sometimes with length and some may be shorter. I do not believe that they will be as short as an SAT passage where it's just a paragraph and a question, and so we don't have enough information about like the word count or anything like that. But there are going to be more questions about integration of knowledge and ideas, and what that means is that more questions of where like saying this idea in the 7th paragraph is related to this idea in the 2nd paragraph, or like how it's related in that way. And they're looking for getting more diverse perspectives on their narratives, which I think the ACOs are already pretty good at that. So I'm curious to see what uh, they're saying on that. Um, And then the science, they're doing some change with this. There's going to be one of the passages about engineering and design topics. I'm not exactly sure what that will entail. and I mean, they've had some of that, in the past anyway, and that there will be more scientific background knowledge. But again, I don't know what that will entail. It seems that because fewer students will probably take the science, then the ones who will be good at it. So like it may mess up the curve pretty dramatically. So I think one of the ways that they're trying to accommodate that is for perhaps making it a better showing for all science students. Uh, so and then the core test options here. So the core will be the composite. And then if you take the science, you'll get a STEM score that is the math and science. But the science will not affect the composite. And then if you take the writing, you'll get a ELA score that will be English reading and writing, but the writing won't affect the composite. And so you could also do all 5 sections if you choose.
If you're a glutton for punishment.
Yeah. All right, Jed.
Uh, all right. So one thing we know that we're gonna have a shorter test coming out, and it'll be a few bucks cheaper. Very exciting. That's been announced. We haven't had details, but we know it's gonna be cheaper because it's gonna be a shorter test. Makes some sense. The rollout looks like this. April, it's a few months away. That's going to be the rollout of the Core ACT in a digital format only at cooperating test centers. And right now, a lot of test centers don't do digital. And so the question is, will more of them do it? Because currently, you can only take a test using the computers of the school. And so you can't bring your own device, which is why a lot of schools are like, we ain't doing that. You can use our classrooms, but we're not opening up our computer lab to a bunch of random kids on a national test day. But that's going to be changing. And so we still do not know how many test centers will make themselves available because kids are going to bring their own devices. So that's really a big change that's happening. Like the SAT currently, it's all BYOD. You bring your own device, your Chromebook, your laptop, your tablet. And so they're finally getting on board that. And there was a question for months and months. Will this be your own device? And the answer is yes. You bring your own device, but not a MacBook. We'll talk about that. In September, this fall, so currently for sophomores and everyone else, in September, everything goes short and sweet and more time per question. So the changes coming in April on the digital test are going to happen to the paper-based test come September. And that means that the 215 question ACT is dead, after this summer. Then everything goes to a shorter ACT with more time per question. And then it'll also happen to school day testing and statewide testing in the spring of 2026. So there is a delay for the school-based testing. I'm not sure why that is, but all national test dates, which is the majority of our kids, for September and October, the February, those are all going to be the shorter and more time format, which is great. So when can I register for these tests? Well, it's happening in December. So it's not available today, but sometime this month, they're going to open up registration for current students. If you're a junior, this is relevant for you. And the real question is, what kind of availability, what kind of supply we're going to see? And are there going to be bottlenecks? Yes, but how intense? That's the question. I logged in about last week, and I was curious. Currently, for the December test, how many spots are available with computer labs where I could take a digital? Because currently there is the option for a digital ACT. It's just the longer one with no advantage. So why would anyone take this? And almost no one cares about this. But it's the first 10 locations for me in Atlanta. I live in Decatur. They're 30 miles away on average. And that's when there's no demand. So no one cares about it. I have to go 30 miles because most schools aren't offering this. Comparatively, the paper option, I live in Decatur, the first 10 options, the nearest one is 2 miles away. Then there's Decatur High School 3 miles away. So there are all these very close options. The first 10, the average distance I have to drive is 8 miles from my house. So that's just to say that right now, without any demand, paper is still much more easily available versus digital. But once there is real demand, it may be the nearest test center for me is 100 miles away. That's like what we're seeing currently in California, where the nearest test center for those kids is 200 miles away. So it could be a massive issue of access, and we do not know. So if you're banking on taking the shorter ACT, you're not guaranteed a spot. And until we actually know the kind of availability and throughput we're going to have, you can't guarantee anything. So I think right now in the short term, prepare for the longer one. And if you get a spot, wonderful. But otherwise, come September, that's when everything goes to this new short format with longer, more time per question. So that's kind of definitely some of our kids will be able to get in April and then in June and July, but we just don't know how many, and we don't know in which markets. And our kids in New York, our kids in DC and California, it could be a very different picture based on where you are locally in the country. All right. When are they going to release practice? Well, they have promised they're going to add on to the annual guide, the Preparing for HT guideline, and they promised to release a full-length practice test in um, early in the winter. So we're waiting for that in January or February because obviously the first test is coming in April, and if they don't release the details of it, then how are kids going to prep? And that affects us also too with Applerouth. When are we going to release our tests? We currently have three full I'm sorry, digital SATs, which are adaptive, which you developed, and Matt's been very key to that process.
It's four,
And
Jed, by the way.
four. I'm
It's four
sorry,
now.
we have four
It's all right.
full length.
We keep working.
You keep adding more, and eventually we'll have
Yeah.
eight. Give it time. That's part of when you work with us, you get our materials as well. But we're going to develop our own practice ACT once we get the full release from the ACT. All right, Janet Godwin talks about what's happening with paper versus digital. And she said, and the person before her, Martin Rorta, said every test that we offer will be digital adaptive. Janet came in and said, no, 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 slow your roll. Let's not go too fast. We're going to eventually get there. But she said, as soon, if there's demand for paper, we're not going to pull that demand away. We're going to meet the demand. But if we see that demand starting to dry up, we are going full digital. And there's a reason, because part of it is when you have paper, and I have to mail paper to a center in cellophane, then they have to take it and scan it. Someone might be able to open the cellophane up, pull a test out, scan it, share it with people. And that's happened all over the world. It's one of the reasons the ACT has been digital only internationally since 2019. So for the last 5 years, there's been no paper because there were all these cheating scandals. They were in India, they were in South Korea, they were in Hong Kong, they were, they were canceling the entire every single test in China, and it was really disruptive for kids who had prepped and worked. So one bad actor pulls a test out, scans it, uploads it onto a website, boom, they cancel the whole country's tests. So that's why digital is better. They can push different tests on the day of. They can push different tests to different, parts of the country. And so you can't, tell a friend the answer for one is C, two is, B. But paper can be compromised. And we've actually seen in the US where they canceled a statewide test. It was in 2019 because, again, someone took it and leaked it. So eventually you want to be digital because paper is still a liability and a security risk. So, but eventually she's saying we're not going to, upset the apple cart. If there's demand for paper, we'll meet it. But eventually they do want to go digital. All right, there are questions about this rollout. Can you bring your own device? We finally know the answer is yes. But you can only use a Windows or a Chromebook. The platform does not allow Macs, which is stupid. And they should fix that because people like their Macs. I like my Mac. There's a question about concordance and concording the digital scores to the paper scores. And what they're saying is there really isn't much of a difference. Like, the point difference is not consequential. Same thing like for the SAT. When they went from the paper SAT to digital SAT, they're saying the point difference was only about 14 points, which on the scale of the SAT is nothing. So that's one question. And so we're hearing similar things from the ACT. We haven't seen the results in the pilot test, but apparently they're concording it pretty tightly. And we don't expect them to give a old ACT to core ACT concordance table. We think it's going to be not administered, which is great for colleges. So they aren't going to have to do any fancy math. Like, well, you got a 26 on the old one, but then you got 27, which means something different. We think it'll all line up pretty well or be so close to not be meaningful. Dropping science, which is more mathy, more STEMmy, is that going to, and then we have English and reading. So we have two verbals, and then we have one math. Is that going to skew things? And will colleges care? And as Matt said, there is nobody on the record. We have no idea, either for or against. And I think the majority of schools, my opinion, they're going to go along with what the ACT does. And if they say you don't require science, because again, how many college admissions tests require science? And how many admissions tests? Is there science on the GRE? No. On the GMAT? No. On ST? No. So many admissions tests don't have a science requirement. It was really kind of a novelty of the ACT to have science that made it stand out. By getting rid of it, they're getting more in line with every other admissions test. So I don't think it's really going to be an issue. Is it going to make the ACT more competitive? I think yes. I think having a test that's shorter with more time per question, kids like that. We've already seen that already on the SAT. Kids are like, this is a better test. I'm not in a rush and I get out by 10:30. Killer, love it. And also for for high schools, they can give their own kids an SAT and be done by 10:30, 11 o'clock. Love it, perfect. Better for everybody. Everybody wins. So we hope they will sort out their test issues and be able to bring your max. That, we'll see about that. What they're going to use for the administration, whereas the College Board uses their Blue Book application when they administer the PSAT on the Blue Book, the SAT on the Blue Book, and also all the APs are going to be going on the digital on the Blue Book. These guys are using their gateway, which is powered by Pearson TestNav interface, which Applerouth has been using TestNav for the past 5 years to administer digital ACTs. We are very familiar. It's a kind of a public thing we can license and use. One downside, the SAT is very smart, where everything is preloaded onto your own application, onto your own laptop or tablet. You need Wi-Fi for a second at the beginning to unlock your, you've already pre-downloaded your test, and you're doing a handshake between your computer and and the cloud with with the code, and then it's unlocked. And until then, it's encrypted. And then at the very, very end, you need Wi-Fi for a moment to upload your answer choices, which is just, a tiny text file, a few kilobytes. And so you need Wi-Fi for like 20 seconds on the front and the back. However, for the ACT, you need Wi-Fi throughout, and that might be a problem. That has been a problem for some of our kids internationally, where Wi-Fi goes in and out or powers in and out. In certain countries, we had kids in different regions in Africa or Indonesia where power was not as good, and they had their tests kind of crashed. But hopefully they'll sort this out. And eventually I could see a world where they too solve this problem and make it so you need Wi-Fi only on the front and the back. Because needing the whole thing can be challenging. There's a question of, does dropping science really make a difference? And so I asked our guru of technology, Ryan Paulson, to run the data and give me all of our scores for the past several years. And we have 4,500 students in the past several years. And we found the averages. And the average for Applerouth students, and some of our colleagues, reading 29, English 28.24, math 26.24, science 27. So we skew a little bit higher with the verbal, but you see these scores are still pretty darn highly correlated. And science, it's right in there. So we ran for those 4,500 students. What's the composite score with science? 27.66, and without science, 27.88. So it's a mean difference of 0.2 points, which is meaningless. And so is it going to change student score getting a science? In aggregate, on average, no. Certain students of that 4,500, sure. I could bucket them some percentage, 5, 10%. It's meaningful, makes a difference in a positive way. But on average, will colleges care? Probably not. Because again, there is a high correlation, the R value between these different sections. All right. And in the science section, it really is not like AP Bio or AP Chem or AP Physics B or AP. Yeah, it's not like that. It's again, there are science questions, but it really is background science knowledge. What's a dependent variable versus an independent variable? If there's measurement error, if there's sampling error, how do I, it's more about the structure of science, not the actual physics or like, molecular weights or, orbitals or things that are really sciencey. So getting rid of it's not going to make a difference. And I think it's not going to be a factor. So I imagine the 2,500 four-year schools who care, I think a small handful would say we really want science. But until we get that feedback, one of those schools on your list might come back and say, we need science. And then if you don't have it, you're in trouble. So until you know um, definitively that the schools on your list don't care about science, assume they're all going to need it. Because I don't want anyone to be in that pickle, which has happened before. When someone like didn't take an essay, then like, oh, the essay's required. Uh-oh, they're not going to count the score. That stinks. Now you got to prep again, and so make sure. I would just say take it until you know anything different. All right, I'm going to hand things back over to my man Matt Kiesner.
Yeah, thanks, Jed. All right. So I think with all these these changes and stuff, um, the SAT and ACT are still very similar tests. And they, and then what they test of, of reading comprehension, of grammar, of being able to interpret graphs, because SAT definitely has uh, scientific graphs both in the reading and on the math on there. So, I mean, the difference is, obviously ACT does have more science on it, though it's going potentially optional, and it does have more advanced math. The ACT math has always been about range of knowledge, asking lots of things in that way. Um, and then on the SAT, it's always had more advanced reading, older reading, poetry, and that kind of things, and um, more dealing with the more word problems, more application of math in that way. All right, so the scores are staying the same. The SAT is been 1600 since back to that in 2016. SAT no longer has sub scores on like they used to have one for reading and writing with there's and then like other scores about how you did on certain skills and stuff. There really isn't that. There's just that bar system we saw. AC will be on that the 36 scale. I use a composite. Um, so they're average, and then when it goes to the new one, it'll just be English, math, and reading will be your core, and then science will have its own score 36, and but cannot affect that composite score. Yeah, so the SC more rigorous on reading. I think that will stay true. Um, and then AC will be more rigorous on math and science. I think, and that is still going to be true. Uh, all right, so I would say that this is for the current ACT. We do not have enough information to do any kind of analysis on the numbers on there. So we'll make sure that is the ACT you can take up until July on paper. Um, but on there, there's more. There's definitely more geometry on the ACT. There's more arithmetic, data analysis stuff. And the SD definitely is focused mostly on algebra skills on there. It is like algebra 2 being the main thing. And then this again, it's the current ACT because we don't have enough information like out of the breakdowns of the future one. But it is all multiple choice questions. They all go easy to hard. There's no formula help. Your calculators allowed. And there's obviously some of these numbers will change, but they will continue to be all multiple choice, and we assume they'll continue to be easy to hard. Um, and so part of this like is the way they see likes to test math is to have this big range of, and then just kind of ask you, do you know what this is? Do you know how to use a logarithm? You how to deal with matrices, conic sections. And so there's a lot of stuff here. This is again, this is of more interest to the student who is shooting for like above a 30 on math. There's definitely lots of questions on the current ACT of that are basic linear equations and geometry and working with percentages and things like that. We're talking about like kind of what makes the ACT unique in its math. And no test would have all of these concepts in there. Like this is just like I think part of being interested in these tests is you get kind of excited about the differences and the uniqueness. But there's still a lot of overlap. And so the SAT math it does have a mix of multiple choice, but there are going to be some student produced responses where because you're on a computer, the student would type in the answer where they have to produce a number. It's never an expression or anything. It'll just be it could be a fraction or an integer. And then the one nice thing about SC is that so that the Desmos calculator, which is a graphing calculator, is very powerful, is built in, and you can use it on every question. And it is a great tool, and that is something that the ACT has not acknowledged. To my understanding, the ACT testing platform does not have any graphing, even like a basic four function one built in. So students would need to bring their own devices. Where on SC you can bring your own device, but even if you have a really high end graphing calculator, Desmos is probably easier to use just because you can point and click. And even though the SC is all digital, you will have scratch paper. You can do things on there. And so for that, for SAT, knowing how to use Desmos is really useful. And if you're just completely confused about what I'm talking about, because we're getting too inside baseball, Desmos it's a free graphing calculator. It's on Desmos.com. You can play with it. It's very nice. think we have like an example problem. So we have system equations thing here. Try to find the value of y. Can you do this with algebra? Absolutely. Could you just plug it into Desmos? That's what you should do. And so we have like a next slide here. Is you don't even have to set it as y equals. You don't have to do any algebra manipulation. You can just type it in any which way because Desmos is flexible. And then you just look at it on the graph. And so the point of intersection is 5, 3. The question asked for what was the value of y. The answer is 3. And you can move on. And so the SAT's testing is your ability to use technology to solve things rather than just have rote memorization on there. So the current AC reading is there's 3 passages are in the same order: literary narrative, social science, humanities, and natural science. One of those will be comparison, and I believe all those things are staying the same. They're mostly contemporary, and I would say like the kind of magazine article style. Something you could read in Scientific America or something like that. You have to go fast on that current ACT. That'll obviously um, potentially you have more. We'll definitely have more time per question. We'll see how that actually feels with the lengths of the passages and the types of questions they're asking. It's for that new core AC. I have to be. These are things we don't know yet, and that I have to acknowledge those because I am clamoring to get my hands on that practice test so that we can make our practice test. But we're not there today. And so SAT verbal is all short passages, so it's literally a paragraph um, and one question, and so it means that there's a lot of variety of reading. It might be a poem, that a Shakespeare sonnet, and the next thing is a analysis of scientific research on involves a graph, and so you're always kind of zigzagging through these things. Where the ACT is still gonna see it with longer form passages. Again, that 10 questions a piece is gonna change on there. But they are definitely sticking with longer form passages compared to the SAT. And one of the nice things about the SAT reading writing section is that it's always the same structure per module. These are the order it goes in. It starts off with words and context, which is like those old classic vocab questions. There were a couple questions on text structure and purpose, like what is this? What is the purpose of the sentence? What is the structure of the passage? But we're talking about short passages on there, and then cross text connections is a very tiny comparison where it's like 2 paragraphs written by different people. Just write these in details, classic reading comprehension questions. What's the main idea? What is the detail you can learn from it? Command evidence is either going to deal with a graph or where you have to there's a claim in the passage and you need to find like a quote that supports it or like a fact, the conclusion of a study that would support it. And then inference is where you're finishing the passage, where like you just finish the last sentence on there. Then it's just kind of switches into grammar and standard English conventions, boundaries of commas and clauses, and other punctuation, form, structure, and sentences, verb, tense, pronouns, that kind of thing. And then it finishes with expression of ideas, transitions like we should use however or should you use furthermore. And then rhetorical synthesis are these kind of weird questions where they give you a bulleted list and you have to synthesize like a sentence or choose a sentence that best synthesizes that information to answer a specific task. So on the digital SAT thing, you'll download the Blue Book app, and many students are going to already have it. If they're taking APs or PSAT, they have it, and it locks on your computer during that. You actually download the test earlier, so there's an SAT this Saturday, so students should already be have had College Board tell them to update their device, and they're actually downloading their test. Then get a code, unlock it. There hasn't really been any trouble with this because digital SAT is now it's old hat, right? We've been doing this for a while now, since almost a year in the U.S. So uh, it's going smoothly at this point. Um, is it still me?
Yeah, I think so, man.
Okay, all right, that's it. And then so we have things of that the SAT and this is also I think the forthcoming ACT digital platform is that you can move around the section, like you can flag things review, and so you can actually see. So for this student they did not answer question 4. They answered number 6, but they wanted to come back to it, in that time, because again, even though it is adaptive, you can move within the section. So for this reading section, they could go and skip around and stuff, and and use that time as they feel fit. And there is going to be some differences in the level of those. So the most students seem to be, um, if you find it's easy, they do probably in the lower level. But there's no feedback on that, and I have seen things where the first math question on the second module can be pretty easy, but you're in the harder module. It's just that by question 8, it should you should be feeling the difficulty in there, and so it's probably best for most students to not worry about which module they're in. I think a better strategy is there's a question on the screen, and can you get this question right and not worry about the back end or trying to game the system. I don't think these are good advice. And then there's the other side of it is that there's item response scoring, which means that different test questions have different weights, and that some questions don't count because they're experimental. Some questions have there's different metrics on there, and you can no longer say if you miss 2 questions you get this score. If you miss 3 questions you get that score because it depends on which questions. The SAT has been still kind of cagey about that. They have not yet released their big um, uh, analysis of it, but they definitely have given information that the back end is it's algorithmic scoring, and it's not easy for a person to understand, and it's not something that you can gain within a test. So how do we prepare for this? There are our practice tests. There are 6 on Blue Book, and as I said earlier, we got 4 of them ourselves. Don't worry about trying to get to the which module you get to. Trying to game the system is really not a good idea on there. Or just don't worry about which one's experimental. You're not really going to be able to see those things. And then just focus on the test, the question on hand. And don't try to oh, this is probably the experimental question. It doesn't matter, right? It's better to just try to do your best and not worry about how you're being evaluated. And then learning Desmos on there, and learning how to try to solve algebra graphically, and thinking about how you could take an equation and split it into 2 separate equations on each side, and then maybe see the solution. There's a lot of creativity. You can use Desmos to solve things. All right, that's you, Jed. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
And so there's the question, we have these 2 tests. I can get into college, for a test required or test encouraged or test optional with the SAT or the ACT. And you want to have a dual baseline, which is a little bit tricky for current juniors when you're working with this world right now. But typically it's you take a practice SAT or use the PSAT, take a practice ACT, and then get a score. We have this weird thing now where there's a third option for a short time if you can get it. And so I think, and meanwhile, until we know for sure you're getting access to that short test, take the regular one until September. If you get that registration and you're locked in, we're going to practice and we're going to work. And honestly, I think anybody who gets that short test is going to do better on the short. Would prefer it. We're seeing massive preference from the old, long, speedy SAT to the new short digital ST. Almost universally, students prefer having a shorter test. It was like in the College Board's pilot, it was 80+%. When they were given both within 2 weeks, they prefer the digital one that's shorter with more time. And so I do think most all kids are going to like this test, which is more, less speedy. Why would you not like a less speedy test? But in this case, take a practice test on both and then compare the percentile. And then if you're, here's our calculus. If you're more than 60 points on the SAT scale of a difference, then you go with the one where you're better at. The example of that is if I get a 26 on the ACT and I get a 1200 on the SAT, those are the same. Even like a 27 or a 25, those are all within the margin of error. But if I get a 1200 on the SAT or PSAT and then I get a 29, well, I am just better. On any given day, I should do better on the ACT. So in that case, I'm going to focus on the ACT and move on. But if you're in the margin of error, because there's about 30 points of error on both tests, and so, but beyond that, you have an advantage. And so within that range of error, ask the student which one felt better, which one's more comfortable. Do you like the way they do math on the SAT or the speed or pacing of this test? But some kids are out of the gate are just better on one than the other. That's why we recommend practice tests very strongly. Ideally, kids take these tests, an official test 3 times. And if I'm going down the path of the SAT, I have three in my pocket. I'm taking the March test, I'm taking the May and then June, and then I'm done. Or if it's the ACT, I'm taking April, I'm taking June, July, and I'm done. And some kids are one and done. I love that. But I like kids signing up for, I like having the three in the pocket. So if I need it, because also there's something called super scoring, which Matt will cover in a minute. But where they take your best section from different test dates, and that ends up being to your advantage having multiple test dates. So, but that's why three is great, but some kids are definitely one and done, some are two and done, but plan on three. What makes your test score go higher? Practice testing. It's real, it helps. Spreading your practice out. If I had to do a 1 week boot camp or a 10-week class, 10-week class, better outcomes. Kids who start earlier tend to do better than those who wait towards the end. The more time you put in, the better the outcome. Makes sense. Having some momentum towards the end and also having a specific goal for every test you're taking. If I open up and I get a 1240 on the PSAT, well, I want to shoot for a 1300 on my first SAT, then a 1340, and then a 1380. So I have like these set goals and I'm working towards them and I'm taking practice tests towards them versus just I want to nebulously do better. I don't like do better. I want to what's your goal? And then that also impacts how many you have to get right, how many you can skip or not get right. It really helps inform your performance and your strategy. And the testing plan is pretty simple, though this is the 1 year where there's a year of transition. So we have 7 ACTs during this calendar year and 7 SATs during the calendar year. But this year, again, April, coming up in 4 months, we debut this short digital test. And then we'll have the June, which will be either the longer paper one or short digital. July, same thing, longer paper, short digital. And then in September, everything goes short. And when everything goes short, I would just take the paper. I wouldn't bother with the digital because there's no real advantage. There's no timing advantage, and I tend to prefer being able to circle and write and star if I had the choice. If not, I certainly could do digital test, but there is, I think, some preference for Matt and I are older, but we still like working with paper.
But there's no Desmos, there's no technical, like you don't get an advantage
Yeah,
having your computer in the sense that you have a tool like Desmos or some annotation thing that is better than a pencil and paper.
yeah. So defer to paper, and also it's gonna be a lot easier to administer paper. But eventually they may give you a Desmos or some other reason, in which case, okay, I'll consider. But right now, until they make it sweeten the deal a little bit, go with paper. But eventually they'll probably force people at some point in time. All right. For juniors, again, this is a weird year. It's a year of tradition. And the real question is availability. Are you going to be able to take this short test in April or in June or July? We don't know. We're going to find out. And there are different ways of prepping. You can prep over the summer. Some kids do that and then they go and take, March and June. Some kids, they might do test prep in March and April and do a class getting ready for the June SAT, then August, October, totally fine. Some of our, that's then there's also, winter, spring testing. I do February, April, and June tests, probably all paper this year, but maybe one digital if you can get one. And then some spring prep. I do an April test prep class, getting ready for the June test, but knowing that September, it all goes short. But here's the thing, the content overlaps so much that if I'm prepping for the paper one, going to, like the content is so similar that you really are prepping for both. Having a shorter test format with more time per question is not going to hurt you. It'll probably only really help you. So if I'm prepped for the big speedy one, I think I'm probably more than ready for that, less speedy, shorter one with a few tweaks to, make sure I'm comfortable with the shorter versus longer passages or a few tweaks to the types of question. But if you're ready for one, they're gonna correlate very highly.
Yeah, and by September, like we will have practice tests and Applerouth will have materials because that's part of my job for the next year.
That is your job, Matt. You got
Yes,
this, man. You got this.
thank you.
Super scoring, Matt, that's you.
Yeah, so to understand the idea of super scoring, because that I know that not everyone understands this, is that if you're looking at these are SAT scores, that if a student did had one the June they did their best on verbal, and then on March they did their best on math, you would take the best scores of each of those, right? The SAT doesn't like really push forward super scores. The ACT has been very pro super scores for quite a few years now.
Yeah.
On there. Um, and so they had a study where they pushed that that they will actually push your super score as for a student who's taken multiple tests. So I can't see any of that changing
No.
with the new test. It's just the big difference is that science is no longer part of the composite score. One for that core um uh the core ACT on there. And so for there is going to be I think there's some questions in the Q&A they're asking about will there be a for a student who took the current one and then took the new one, how will they super score? I imagine that like because this it's going to be 1 to 36. I think the ACT is just going to like, oh, you pulled out your math, you pulled out your reading in English, or those are all going to be concordant.
Yeah.
I think the issue is the science, whether
They'll
uh,
separate science out going back, I think
um,
retroactively,
yeah, I
probably.
think that if you've taken a core version, it will now like it'll be like your super score will be core, and I think it's one thing before we I think we because we get kind of caught up on this is like this is a very short period on a long game for the ACT, and so I think they're probably going to yeah, and this is the SAT did this as well. Just like there's going to be, um, it's better to like just keep the concordance on there versus trying to put a student in a bad situation because the juniors this year they're dealing with it. That's just 1 year in
Yeah.
of many. And I know for families that I know it's an important year for you, but I don't think that they're gonna like really sweat it because it's not a long-term concern. Yeah, and so we have some we have SAT practice tests. Again, it says three. It's
Or
now four. Yeah, we got one released a few months back there. Um, and one thing about our reports, it gives a lot of feedback about what you got right and wrong on there. It's a little more transparent than what you see on the the official test there. And they have it if you go on to appleproof.com and you can take one of these tonight, though it is a little bit late.
take one
Uh,
tonight.
yeah,
Everyone go home and do a practice test this
yeah,
evening.
evening practice tests are the
After you
best,
watch Stephen Colbert, do a practice test. It'll be good. Um, all right. Then our time is, things took a little longer, which is okay. But there's a question of should you send in your test scores and before get your baseline, find out the middle 50 percentile for the colleges to which you're applying. I'm going to jump through this. If you think, if it's going to help you, if you're in the range of that freshman class and their freshman profile, if you're on profile, send your score. If you're below profile, and I probably would withhold the score. Here's my last slide. The example is like for the Buffs, they're middle 50 percentile, half the class submits a score between an 1170 and 1380. So if I get from the midpoint ahead, if I get a 1270 or above, send it, send it. If, however, I get below an 1170, in most cases, you don't want to send it if you're a straight academic applicant. If you're a first generation kid, or if you're applying from the backwaters of West Virginia and they're trying to recruit from there, or Wyoming or somewhere where they get very few students, that 1170, may be competitive from where you are. But if you're coming from a standard, feeder school or good high school and they get, I probably wouldn't send my 1140 to college. I would go with my grades and my academic rigor and so forth. And then the third quartile, that's really the whole it depends category. If I have a 1260, more likely than if I had 1170. And also, if I'm applying to an engineering program or a business or a STEM, computer science, and I have a strong math score in there, let's say I have a 700 in math and a 550 in verbal, but I'm applying to be an engineer, I want to showcase my strong my math skill. So even though I'm a little bit low on the composite, that strong math means more for me as a aspiring engineer or STEM kid. So I send it. So that's a part of the factors involved in that. We do have some questions, and I want to make sure we answer those questions.
Yeah.
Q&A. Very top. Is there info on these two websites about the new pre-test questions on every subset? Your slides seem to show a bunch of questions which don't count on the whole exam. I haven't heard anything about that yet. So that was something from a webinar
Mhm.
that was given by the ACT. And again, it's not on their published website.
Yeah.
So this may be, they could still change it.
Mhm.
that there were a bunch of experimental questions. So of the 100, of the 171 questions plus the science is 40, the two, there are going to be 30 questions that are experimental potentially. But because there are only 8 of the 98 are experimental on the College Board, that's about 10%. This would be more than 10%, obviously. This
Yeah.
would be more like 15 or so percent
Yeah,
um, for the
I can't,
200.
sorry, I can't speak to the numbers on those. I can say that right now they have this they have a kind of a secret fifth section where they ask you, they make kids stay and take like a little mini section of one of the topics, and what they're getting rid of that. And so they're now doing, they will be like integrated, but the the I would say they take those numbers as like a hypothetical and or not gospel at this point because
Yeah, they could change it until they
mhm,
publish it officially, but that was on a webinar they gave.
yeah,
Um, can the April test be taken on paper, even though there's an option for digital? Yes, and we think it'll probably be 90% paper and 10% or less digital. So paper is going to be the dominant form until September. And even then, paper is still dominant, but there'll be, it all lines up. So to clarify, Michael, in April, options will be shorter, digital with limited availability, or traditional longer for section. Yes. In September, options will be shorter digital or shorter paper. Yes.
yeah.
That's right. So we're in this
September
weird,
the test changes like for
yeah, September
all
core is pushed to everything. In September, the old ACT is dead. It doesn't exist. It's been this format since 1959 and it dies. And never again will there be a 60 question math section, 1 hour for math. That'll never ever happen again. That goes away. So the format, really, it's a radical change. Um, or radical is a big word. A substantial change.
yeah.
All
I
right.
mean we need more radical tests,
I want some radical stuff
like
here.
some backflips.
Exactly. Has the ACT said when we're going to get more than one practice exam? All they promised us so far is early 2025, we're getting one.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, we were talking about this in our with I was in the curriculum, we had a little meeting today, and so like they have this book of like the official guide that Wiley publishes, and they have to make millions of dollars off these books. Of every year they update them with practice tests, and certainly the one that they've been publishing them in May, each year, and so the May one because it's going to be for the forthcoming school year, so that has to have new practice tests in there. So I think um that will be the stopgap is that official Wiley book that usually has uh what 5 practice tests in it. I don't know that it'll be that many initially, but there should be something because I can't imagine that they want to reduce that those sales um
yeah. And we have
from
a
this.
tiny poll which popped up just telling us, is there anything you're interested in learning more about? And, that we do test prep all the time with thousands of kids all over the country. So if you want any help with the stuff, we are very good at this after many decades. There's one more question. If it's ACT, if a student takes one paper and one digital, and super score be taken, and I think Matt addressed that. We think
Yeah,
they're
I
going to
think I answered
super
that.
score, and I would be amazed if they didn't, because what they're saying is these things correlate so highly. They're fungible and transferable. And like what we're seeing with the SAT is that colleges couldn't care less. One like Princeton says, no, we won't super score. That's one school of 2,500. Everyone's like, we'll go along with the College Board. But there are a few folks who will take a big stand and say, like, our analysis shows, because they're not going to have any analysis. And there are already kids taking the pilots. So most kids are going to just, most colleges will accept it from the testing agency. Thanks. It was great. Oh man, Matt, is there an overlap between
Yeah,
SH?
so there's a question here about the SHSAT and the SAT. I can answer this. So the SHSAT is only taken by typically eighth graders in New York City to get into specialized private high schools. If you don't have a eighth grader in New York City, this does not apply to you. But someone asked, and I love talking about weird acronym tests. So is there overlap? Absolutely, in the sense that there's lots of reading comprehension and then there's math, and that in that ways. Obviously, the SHSAT because it's for middle school is not going to have a lot of the advanced algebra 2 concepts. And there, if you have a middle schooler or I guess it would be should be now like a seventh grader, There are official practice tests that the board of that the Department of Education, New York, I'm probably saying that wrong, but the New York City School Board that they release, and I would use those as first off in there because it is an important test for there, rather than jumping right to SAT practice because there are things that SAT and SHSAT are very different. SAT has grammar. The SHSAT really it has. I mean, it's like they have like 7 grammar questions, and there's definitely a lot more math on there. But that's it's way in my wheelhouse. So
That is, you are the man with the SAT. That Michael had another question about short of taking your practice test for the ST, the ACT, is there any criteria that makes one test over the other more better for a student? And honestly, you can't really predict because there are differences, still differences in speed and pacing. There are some differences in content. Again, the reading level is about 2 grade levels higher for the SAT. They're using older material. They're throwing Shakespeare, Bronte. There's more advanced reading on the SAT, harder vocabulary, more advanced math on the ACT. With the verbal, the grammar is very similar. The English section, those are so similar, it's almost identical back, what they're actually covering. Very few differences. And then the reading skills, apart from the level of reading they're very similar question types. So I would just say do a practice. And again, some kids just naturally do better.
yeah,
Some kids, there's very little difference. But until you do
yeah,
a practice test, you don't know for sure. And now these tests are getting shorter, where a practice SAT is 2 hours and 15 minutes. And we're soon going to see that 2 hour and 5 minute ACT. So it's getting. It used to be these were full day affairs. I mean, these were 5 hour assessments with writing and the essay. And I'm very grateful those days are behind us because that stunk. To get up
yeah.
7:30, 8 o'clock to 1 o'clock, you're in a test center, and that was about mental endurance, which is not helpful. A lot of kids had attentional problems, which are now going away, which I think are lovely. So I love these new tests. As a psychometrics guy, I'm a big fan. We're testing actual content, not other factors like attention and mental endurance and processing speed, which really aren't meaningful when it comes to college performance. So I think it's great.
Yeah, yeah, just to uh, jump on that. I think it's better, rather than being a top down, like we as a test experts think says that you should take this test, or I think it's better for the students to have the experiential and to kind of see what they prefer because they're going to be putting all the work in that. And
Yeah,
if the scores are dead even, which is more common than not these days, then it's like what's okay, which one does the student want to put the work into? I think
yeah,
it's better I would rather nurture that student in that way versus being, oh, we like the SC better or we like the AC better.
yeah. I think
Yeah.
that there's a world where these tests are both all digital. Maybe they're both all adaptive. I think science eventually dies a slow death, like the essay did. And
Hope it
eventually
does.
these are almost interchangeable down the road, which is fine.
It's
But
Coke
but
versus Pepsi.
huh? Coke versus Pepsi, you choose your flavor.
It's Coke versus Pepsi. Yeah.
But there's definitely a lot of alignment. They always kind of in this duopoly, they come to some convergence. These tests were so different in the 80s and 90s, like night and day. Now they're closer and closer. So that's it. If you need help with the SAT, the ACT, AP exams, or general math or physics or chemistry, we do
Or the
that.
SHSAT.
Or the SH, SAT, call Matt.
Oh,
He's
oh.
amazing at that. He wrote a book on that. One of the few people in the country who's written a book on the SAT. So, all right, y'all. Well, everybody have a good night and look forward to our next round. All right, y'all. Take care.
Good.
Bye-bye.